the phenotype model stands for ADD very, very well, but you can miss some of the nuances. One of the things that I don't like about the moniker ADD, that attention is not understood then as an evolving experience. And the ERP captures that evolving experience. It doesn't just capture the static sense that, well, it can be an attention problem. It gives us a good correlation. And by the way, brain maps, when you use eyes open, eyes closed, give you a great pointing at where do I want to point the tools that I've got, whether it's direct current, alternating current, neurofeedback. It gives you a great map, but it can miss some of the fine-tooth details of the unfolding experience of attention. I think that we're at a place where we can take neurotherapies and be far more specific with our interventions because of that tool. And we can test them and we can say, okay, here are my results. And those become publishable results in a way that the QEEG data will not necessarily show. This course is for anyone who's just starting, that wants to understand a theoretic model that will help them in understanding even a broader set of tests in time. It's a laying of a foundation that is really sorely needed right now. We've gotten to the place where people are hunting and pecking and they're looking for a specific peak. Looking for a specific peak is a fool's errand. You'll be hunting and pecking all over the place. It's better when dealing with a clinical population to understand that attention model that I developed years ago just to help myself remember what happens in attention, and then treating based on the unfolding process that happens in a person's testing. When I see an EEG, I'm thinking metabolically. I'm not thinking statistically. I use statistics to corroborate what I'm thinking metabolically. The EEG is downstream metabolic signal. And it's silly to think of it as anything but.
Hello. Thanks for tuning in to EEG Worlds. I'm Nikki, and today I'm chatting with John LeMay. John has created a very exciting course on event-related potentials for beginners, and it was fascinating to chat with him about his model, and I'm excited to see some of you in class. So if you're interested in that, schoolofneurotherapy.com, and also please subscribe to my channel, EEG Worlds. Thanks for watching. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
Are you excited?
It's been a day or two. I don't know. I love Will Ferrell when he says, "I'm so excited and I don't know why."
Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen during this course. Anything could happen. You're going to be taking people out onto the water.
That would be fantastic. I'd love to see a few people in this field drown a little.
Oh, that's not where I was going with it, but
just.
So we're not going to be getting the live stream from like a GoPro from your surfboard.
No, I might add that to one or two of the slides now and again, just to keep everybody awake, because even though I find ERPs exciting and EEGs exciting, and most of the people in the field do, so most people will stay awake. But there's got to be one or two.
Yeah. Why teach an ERP course? Don't we have enough out there?
Well, the funny thing is that when I started trying to get into ERPs 10 years ago, I couldn't get anybody who would really teach me ERPs. Jay was very busy, and he said, "Hey, look, I'm busy with the EEG courses, and ERP is just an add-on to an EEG, and so I'm not going to go there." Find somebody else, gave me some names, a few people that I called. They were so busy clinically that they didn't have time. And then there were other people who would say, "Yeah, absolutely, I'll show you ERPs," but I'd press into their knowledge base just a little bit. It would just kind of crumble. Yeah, most everybody was busy, and those that said that they had experience with ERPs didn't have a lot of experience. They had maybe done something in college, but didn't really have a lot of true interest in ERPs. And then, of course, if you approached anybody that was in the NeuroGuide end of the field, they would all say, well, in ERP is just pointless because everything's timed out and we can see it all in a resting state. And I just never could accept that answer. That just didn't make sense to me. And now that I've done ERPs to the tune of probably 2 or 3 a week for several years now, I can't even imagine answering that way. It just doesn't compute. So, I just have to beg to differ, and that's okay. We've got differences of opinion all over the field, and that's fine. It's good for us.
So, to play the devil's advocate or to maybe steel man their arguments, why wouldn't you get into ERPs? Or, what's maybe deceptive about it?
The deceptive part is that it's simple. That it's one thing. ERPs are one test. That's one of the great difficulties. ERPs are variable, and you look at them based on the test situation that you set up. In the clinical realm, most of us are doing a simple go, no go, or a queued go, no go. And that is sufficient for a lot of situations. For some, it's not what you need. But it's a good test. Some others are looking really at CNV, continuous negative variation. Some people are also looking at other testing parameters. But for the most part, most of us are looking at queued go, no go. But it's not the only way of testing, and it's certainly limiting to think that that would be the only way of testing. And but a lot of us who are clinicians also don't have time to run around looking for different tests. So it usually ends up being a queued go, no go, which is a pretty good, well-rounded test. And it's the reason that everybody does it.
So what happens in the queued go, no go test, and why is it so popular?
It really allows you to look at inhibition, which is a core concept in terms of understanding physiology. Inhibition of networks, when you have as it's called, a prepotent activation set in mind, press the button when you see 2 pictures that are similar or the same. When you have that kind of prepotentiated response ready, and you get 2 different pictures, and you're looking for that, match of pictures, it is that inhibition of that motor network presupposed set that's ready to go is really important in terms of understanding how well a person's functioning, how well their executive system's functioning, how well they're able to make decisions, how many interferences are running in kind of the background of their own mind. So, it gives you an idea of how well a person manages their resources and then inhibits a response that's primed. And so that's part of what we're using that ends up being so popular. I think that since much of the field grew up around attention deficit disorder, at least a good portion of it, we have a bent in that direction, and it gives good information in that direction. And it might miss other things. Sometimes it can miss auditory processing things. So you get a person who's using 2 pictures in a visual go, no go, and they're not looking at how well somebody recognizes words in a list, or phonetic sounds in a grouping, and picking out what is not fitting, kind of the non sequitur, phonic, phonic grouping. And those are all very, very good tests and very appropriate tests for certain clients. And we don't right now use them. We're not really set up to use them in most of the software platforms. You get a small smattering of it in the program that Yuri Kropotov and Andreas Mueller created with HBI. You just get a little bit of it, but not really quite enough because you don't quite have enough trials. And so it's not specific to that. It's kind of like they're looking for, do I get a little bit of a hit? And if I get that little bit of hit, then I'll explore further. That's Andreas's kind of way of going about that. And you talk about a smart clinician that I really respect. But in the general field, we're just not set up towards it. And it's not surprising entirely. I think the neuroscience field, in studying the ERP and the EP has really developed a lot of these tests. You have facial recognition, familiar faces, unfamiliar faces, affect recognition, all of those things that are being studied at like UCSD or MIT or New York University. There's a bunch of places that are doing things like that, but we don't have those tests in the clinical psychophysiology world very often yet. And I think it's coming, but it's not developed yet.
So you talked about psychophysiology, and you got your PhD in applied psychophysiology.
Yeah.
I heard from a little bird that you included ERPs as part of that process. So tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. So I did, COVID hit right in the middle of my dissertation, which really was just a torture, trying to find the right PG word for it. So what happened was, it just had gotten started with having subjects and everything, and Sarah Wyckoff had found a space for me to do my experiments, and I was on campus at Arizona State and prepping everything, and we got this. Everything's going to be locked down. Campus is going to be locked down. Nobody's going to be able to go out unless it's, necessary medical procedures. And that was the end. So, fortunately, the school had mercy on me, both the IRB and my dissertation committee that Cynthia Kirsten was on, and she was the chair of my dissertation committee, and she said, you know what, let's get this thing done. And so we did a more simple pre-post on pre and post resting state on audiovisual entrainment. The school had decided that they were against me using alternating current because they were concerned about electrocution, which to me was ridiculous. I was like, how many times can you lick a 9-volt battery before you die? I just was so irritated. And, they wouldn't let me do alternating current. They wouldn't let me use direct current. I'm like, look at all the safety literature. I mean, it's just everywhere. Yeah, nope. But we could be questioned about this. And so I just threw up my hands and went, okay, fine. And we did audio visual entrainment. Actually, it was a huge learning experience because I had to shift gears and really think about things in terms of thalamocortical regulation. And so we did ERPs before a rest period, and part of one group got a rest period, and one group got an audiovisual entrainment period between tasks. And because of the COVID, I wasn't able to get as many subjects as I wanted, so it ended up being not quite as good as I had hoped, but did point me in the right direction. Everybody who did the audio visual entrainment performed better in terms of their ERP down the midline, pre and post, whereas that was not true. There was a greater fatigue in the control group, which was getting a rest period in between. And that was exciting, actually, to see. And I think that the biggest piece was looking at the amplitude. There was no differences in latency, because this is a simple pre-post. Both Cynthia and I did exactly what Jay would suggest, which is plug your nose and walk in. And we went ahead and did this pre-post, and the parietal P3, the P3V that we were really looking at, held much better. It improved pre and post in the research group and in the experimental group, and then in the other group, it faded. So you had people who had less energy, less norepinephrine, basically, over the parietal region. So not a sustaining of attention, since norep is what the brain uses to sustain energy through a small task to bring it to completion. And that was kind of exciting. And I got to continue doing that with not as controlled subjects, people in the office and others, and just continue to test, does this happen over and over and over again? And I think I'm at 60 people right now, and it's over and over and over again. So, it's really pretty solid. And I didn't know whether it was or wasn't. I came at it very agnostically, willing to take my experimental method seriously. And so it was a great pre-post. And it wasn't a dissertation on, what is the ERP? It was a dissertation on what is the effect of this stimulation on the cortex. And I can say that you get an improvement in parietal and occipital function and sharing, information sharing pre and post.
So when you see an increase in that P3V amplitude, that reflects recruitment of sort of larger network of activity. Tell me about that. And is it always the case that a larger amplitude is reflective of greater function?
This is one of the things that's really important to understand in physiology. The brain is an efficiency organ. And when we're looking at the brain as it's going to grow and grow and grow, that's kind of silly. It's going to initially grow, and then it's going to pare down so that it can make the most efficient action out of something that it possibly can. And so you're going to get an increase in, your amplitudes pre and post certain things. But if you keep at it, you're also going to see a decrease. And you might find better performance, but a decrease. And that is consistent with changes in the way that networks function and organize, because the brain is an efficiency organ. It always drove me nuts as a young man in the neuroscience world when people would say, well, you only use 10% of your brain. And it always bothered me. It was because, you'd hear stuff like that. It was like, well, of course you do if it's running right. You only use 10% of your car if you're on a freeway trip. You're not using the tire iron, your stereo is not at 10, your lights aren't all on, your air conditioning and your heater. It's an efficiency thing. What do you need and what are you using it for? And that's the way that the cortex operates.
So to go back to your earlier example of what's happening in ADD/ADHD, as far as being able to show sort of like a lack of inhibitory capacity with the ERPs, what does that look like in terms of like specific amplitudes that we might be looking at? And is that stuff we would be able to see in the QEEG otherwise?
You can see some of it in resting state, and certainly that has been well documented. The phenotype model stands for ADD very, very well. But you can miss some of the nuances. One of the things that I don't like about the moniker ADD or attention deficit disorder or attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity is that attention is not understood then as an evolving experience. And the ERP captures that evolving experience. It doesn't just capture the static sense that, well, it can be an attention problem. It gives us a good correlation. And by the way, brain maps, when you use eyes open, eyes closed, give you a great pointing at where do I want to point the tools that I've got, whether it's direct current, alternating current, neurofeedback, whatever it is. It gives you a great map, but it can miss some of the fine-tooth details of the unfolding experience of attention. And it's that unfolding experience that you can capture in an EEG, in an ERP, that allows for even finer toothed intervention. And the QEEG is terrible at giving you a pre-post comparison. And the ERP is specific in giving you a pre-post comparison. It's not the most specific thing in the world because none of these things are, but as far as an estimation, because it's a tool to develop hypotheses and test them. As a way of testing your hypothesis, I think it is phenomenal. Whereas the QEEG just is not.
So in your own clinical practice, has the ERP changed how you specifically deal with ADD, ADHD? Do you deal that much with it?
Yeah.
What has changed as far as like the protocols you run on people?
Well, first of all, I have to back up and say I wish I was able to do more clinical work in one setting. I'm split amongst 4 different settings right now. So, one in San Diego, thank you to Amanda Gretsch, where I really have a very, background Wizard of Oz, approach, because I'm the guy behind the curtain and nobody sees me and knows me, and they're all dealing with Amanda, but she sends me lots of ERPs and I just love it. Every time when I get happy, it's like, oh, another one to chew through. Pathways to Health in Pismo Beach, and that clinic is always just going, and they have everything you can imagine, from Alzheimer's and dementia to head injuries to ADD to on and on. Michael Cohen's practice, which is primarily attention deficit disorder issues, I think, and anxiety. He's getting a smattering of everything, but a lot of ADD. And then also out in Chicago and Wisconsin, Kyle Ferroli and Steve Best, who's at the Neuroscience Center. They'll send me all kinds of different things. So I see a variety of things, and I don't know from day to day what I'm going to get. So it keeps me from being bored. I'm not doing my own clinical practice as much anymore. It's more like I'm consulting for clinical practices.
But I imagine it sort of changes your view of potentially where on the scalp, we might want to be placing sensors or electrodes, and also your view of, how does the activation pattern view of ERPs inform then like protocol selection?
Yeah. Well, when I said that I was bothered by attention being seen in a static way, or, maybe I should say stationary, one monolithic way. It's a monolithic phenomenon. That doesn't fit at all with what you see in ERPs. When you see an ERP, you get to see how fast is the arousal. You get to see the anticipation. for the next set, you get to see, how quickly does the nervous system respond? Does it over respond? Does it under respond? And that happens as an unfolding of time. Then you get to see the different stages of attention, which is the model that I'm using right now to help people understand ERPs. It's not the world's greatest model, and I hope that our field rips it apart so that it can be built into a model that really is super solid. But I think it's pretty good. And I got to thank Andreas Mueller for some of that model, although I had developed it beforehand, but he just lit a fire under me in that, I've been looking at this right for a while. In attention, you have stages, and they can be placed out as arousal and the maintenance of arousal. That's energy management. How well do I use my metabolism all the way through? Do I spend all of my, am I like a 13-year-old kid where, a 13-year-old boy where I spend all of my cash on candy and food, and I have nothing left over for gas, so I'm begging my parents for gas, So how is energy managed within the system? So you see that in arousal going through the whole thing. And but you also see the initial arousal. Is somebody over primed to respond? That arousal then is followed by an orientation. There's always an orientation to what it is that's a stimulus. We orient to a stimulus for survival. So you have the colliculi, the brainstem, the motor system, all moving and organized to whatever it is in our environment. And when it's a game like this, you capture that as well. And you can see, is there an orienting of the cortex to what the stimulus is? And then secondarily to that, a detection of the features so that I know how that thing that I just oriented to matches with the rules of the game. And that's a detection. So in the first 200 milliseconds, you've got arouse, orient, detect, and an EEG just will not give you that in raw EEG. You have to time lock it to a stimulus. So you have arouse, orient, detect, and then you have execute. What do I do with it? What's my decision now that I have got the feature selection down? And that detection is seen in the P3. And then right after that, there's a monitoring. What was the effect of what I've chosen to do? And a replay in memory. That's all happening in a monitoring phase. And after that, there is either some kind of a rest or reorganization that begins. And if people are efficient and they feel that they've got it correct and they repeat it in their mind really quickly and go, yep, got it, they've moved on. But for people who have arousal difficulties and management of energy difficulties and they're inefficient, they will stay elevated. And so you can see late features in an ERP that allow you to know this person just can't let go of what their performance is like, or they're afraid they're going to miss something. And you don't get that kind of nuance just from a QEEG. You can make some of that up and talk with a person and they could say, yeah, I could do that, et cetera, which is good. And that's interviewing skills relative to a map. But the ERP will give you a timing and a measure, and then you can do an intervention and then look back and see, has that come down? Has that changed? And that's specific to ERPs.
So you're talking about sort of differences in people's monitoring behaviors. What sort of clinical populations would that potentially have implications for?
Learning disabilities. You can see higher anxiety in learning disabilities, and you see poorer orienting and detecting responses in learning disabilities. You can see it in ADD, ADHD. You can see poor management across the cycle. Anxiety, you can see very clearly, OCD is another one where you see obsessive compulsive disorder. Clients will replay and replay, even though they've got everything right. They'll oftentimes be early primed, and then you'll see interruptions in their attention. So when people with OCD talk about not being able to pay attention well, you can actually see that in the unfolding of the attention process in a cue go no go, which is why it's so useful clinically.
So let's take a step back. You've talked about
I've been on.
No, it's just great. The metaphor of like surfing and the attention cycle. First of all, how much fun were you having when you came up with, let's make an ERP course that's surfing?
It was Tiffany's idea. Yeah. I don't think entirely, because when I stood up, Mikado set me up to succeed in the last Neurofield conference, because he had talked about, we don't know what we're looking at. We're way too far out, and we don't know what we're looking at unless you have 138 channel geodescent ERP. And I was like, that's not how it works for the rest of us, because we're clinicians and we have to take the best tool that we have right now, even if it's a a slide rule and a crappy microscope. We've got to figure this stuff out, because we have people who want help, and we don't have time to sit in the ivory tower and talk about the difference of two sets of tissues that are really close in a tertiary portion of the neurology. He's probably correct, but we have enough of a generator of hypotheses and a way to generate a testing of that hypothesis that we've been given a golden tool, and we can make the most of it. And most of the time it works. So Mikado, I get what he was saying from an academic point. He was dead on. He was right. The difficulty was that it was the wrong population to unveil that. And then to get to go right after him when I'm talking about a simple clinical model was like, oh man, you just proved my point. This is not, we don't have the world's greatest tool, but we have a darn good one, and it's good enough. I would equate this to drilling for water. When I was a kid, I grew up in Reno, and the water table there is funny. It's scarce in certain places, and then it's large in other places. And you would have guys that would come out that would water witch, and they'd walk around with their hangers, that were bent hangers. You could see them, they probably just got them off of their fresh dry cleaning, and rebent them so that they could walk around and wait until they crossed over a body of water. And was that the most efficient tool? No, but most of those guys were close enough that the drilling equipment that was coming out that was sonar wasn't getting it right quite as often as the water witchers. And so people, They wanted a well on their property. They'd hire one of these water witchers to walk the place for $100. And, this guy'd be out there, marking it with flags and his two little hangers hanging off of his hands. And, we have a water witching tool. It helps us find water. And can we use that water afterwards? All those other things are down the way aspects of this, to extend that metaphor. But we really have a great tool, and we don't need the super sonar ultra truck that they would drive in for, we'll rent it to you for $2,000 an hour. That's what we're dealing with,
Well, and it speaks to the concept of efficiency as well, right?
Yeah.
And also just, change over time.
Yes.
10, 20 years from now, we're all going to be able to get the G-Tech pangolin for cheap. That's like 256 channels,
I can't wait.
Um, and it's great to aspire to that. And it's interesting to think too about like how just the market is changing so much. But like at the end of the day, this is a technology that most people are just leaving on the table, which means people are leaving results and understanding on the table. Um, and at the same time, they're doing tons of work and a lot of frustration goes into trying to understand QEEG, right? The data is messy. It's hard to do pre-post comparisons. It's susceptible to so many different environmental and temporary changes that it's like you can only have a certain amount of confidence in a lot of things that you see in it. So
Yes.
to go from that with the same equipment using event-related potentials, in my view, and here I am getting on my soapbox, but it's like, to me, that's like a step function, whatever metaphor you want to use, order of magnitude,
Yeah.
like big
I would,
multiplier in terms of accuracy, even though it's not like linear. And even though a lot of it takes some learning and understanding to kind of parse. And then, yeah, also like you were saying, reliability, like it's going to be consistent from day to day. And when there's an actual change that's happening in the brain as a result of a head injury or as a result of like training that's working, you're going to see it in the ERPs.
yes.
So to me, it's exciting that you're promoting ERPs like this, and also, give you credit for all of the work that you did during your PhD in terms of informing the development of the neurofield system. You were kind of like one of the first folks really putting it through its paces for your research.
Yeah, I guess I was. I guess I was. Yeah. It was fun because I think Nick and Tiff arrived at a conference. Was the second one I had gone to. I think it was the second one they had gone to on ERPs, and we were trying to figure out, how to put everything in the right pipeline and everything else. And Nick had listened to it a few more times than I had had time to, and I was so jealous of how much he had learned. So I buckled down and locked myself in my room. I remember for days, trying to figure the thing out. And all in all, the development of it has been very, very exciting because I think that we're at a place where we can take neurotherapies and be far more specific with our interventions because of that tool. And we can test them and we can say, okay, here are my results. And those become publishable results in a way that the QEEG data will not necessarily show. And certainly in a way that the neuroscience community recognizes a bit more. In spite of all its vagaries and difficulties, it's still one of the best tools, and I can't believe we get to play with it all the time.
So do you feel like the neuroscience community sort of respects or acknowledges or just sees value in ERP more than resting state?
They do for publication reasons, yes. Yeah, the medical community sticks close to EEG, and the academic community tends to look towards the ERP. Yeah.
Do you think there will ever be a day that you can get an ERP done in a hospital?
Well, yeah, you can. In certain hospitals, you certainly can now. But what disorder are you looking for? I mean, if you're looking for epilepsy, you're not going to go flashing, farm pictures from 1950 Russia. Had a kid, or red and green stop signs, with Nick's or whoever's. Of course, that's just how it comes out of the box. But but
Well, I had an eye-opening experience doing ERP on someone who had epilepsy, and their activation, I mean, I could put it up on the screen. It's been de-identified and released for educational purposes, but
Okay.
it's just like you can't pick out a signal in it practically, you know,
Yeah, I can
even
imagine.
though,
Pretty chaotic, because it wouldn't be the right test for the situation. And in that way, I think medical EEG and QEEG go together in so many ways. Um, I I would say that if I was to go, well, gee, would I want to get an ERP with a person with epilepsy? No. Schizophrenia, not really. Getting a cap on their head anyway and listening to their thoughts just sounds like a great idea. It really goes bad every time. But I think if I'm looking at OCD, I want to see it. I want to see the ERP. I don't
show
want
you
to
mine.
G, attention deficit disorder. I want to see the ERP. I don't want to just see the EEG. And learning disabilities, I want to see the ERP and not just the EEG.
So, who is this course for?
This course is for anyone who's just starting that wants to understand a theoretic model that will help them in understanding even a broader set of tests in time. It's a laying of a foundation, and I think that is really sorely needed right now. We've gotten to the place where people are hunting and pecking, and they're looking for a specific peak. And even as Andrew Luck points out, looking for a specific peak is a fool's errand. You'll be hunting and pecking all over the place. It's better when dealing with a clinical population to understand that attention model that I developed years ago just to help myself remember what happens in attention, and then treating based on the unfolding process that happens in a person's testing. I think it's just a far more efficient way of doing things. And then when you look pre and post and you see differences, they're more robust differences because the ERP at the P3 is a pretty stable feature. There were some experiments done by Uri and some others that showed that even months later, without any other intervention, that the ERP timing was the same. High consistency, and then because of that, if you see changes, it's like this is a change. This is not, well, it looks like it's going from slightly red to a dusky orange. Uh, it's a
We're
much,
reading the tea leaves.
yeah, and I like the tea leaves too, but for the populations that I mentioned, I would definitely want an ERP because I want to show the person what's happening as they are going through their treatment. It gives more buy-in. If you just think selfishly financially, and none of us really do because we're clinicians. I mean, we're just oriented towards helping people. But it's very hard to get buy-in on QEEG for some of those disorders because the populations are broad. So the databases, the variants in the databases, and on and on and on. You know all the discussions. Or changes in amplitude can be, did you have breakfast? Really,
Did you sleep 6 hours or 8 hours?
exactly. So there are some really, things like that play more into the QEEG and a little less into the ERP in terms of stability. And those things play into the stability in ERP too. So I don't want to say that, paint it as a black and white issue. It's not. But we do have a little bit more standing when we can show somebody that their performance every few weeks is improving, not only in their reaction times and maybe on a small neuropsych mini test here or there, word lists, whatever. But when you see the changes physically in the brain, where the brain's starting to bind more in, it's starting to bind networks a bit more correctly front to back, right around 200 milliseconds, and it's letting go of the tissues to do something else afterwards. All of that, you can see the efficiency in the ERP, and the way that it can be parsed out now too is phenomenal. And that's part of what this course is about. It's like, let's lay a foundation. Let's look at the theoretic model, and then let's go through each portion of the theoretic model. But now let's look at it in all the different kind of slides that you can produce in EEG Lab and out of the box in Nick's software, because there are so many graphs. You could actually just kill yourself with graphs, not knowing what to do with them. But once you know what to do with just a select few of them, it really, that ERSP is phenomenal for understanding how a network binds together, and does it let go, does it not? And looking at cross-frequency coupling as a phenomenon within that graph is something you can kind of surmise or guess at, and it's really a great tool for looking at the ERP.
So this is a course for more beginners in ERP. Are there any other resources out there, like books that are geared towards beginners in clinical ERP?
I really haven't seen any good books yet on beginning in ERP. I mean, the standard encyclopedia that everybody has to get is Andrew Luck and Napperman's Napperman. I can never remember the name, but
I'll put it up on the screen. Is it Stephen J. Luck?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I keep saying Andrew, don't I? Because I have a friend who surfs with me. His name is Andrew Luck. That's funny. That's why I keep saying that. Oh, boy, I'm going to have to get out of that habit.
Sorry, everyone's going to put down in the comments on the video how embarrassing that is. Everyone's going to make fun of you.
I think they should.
Well, look at you. You're doing a course on ERPs, so.
It's all good. Yeah.
Yeah, the books out there, I mean, the books out there are great. And obviously Yuri's book is famous, but it's also like, my experience is like a lot of these resources are also intense. Like you open it and it's like, okay, whoa, this is a lot.
Yeah. I'm actually writing one right now.
You are?
Yeah. On this theoretic model. And so it's chewing up a lot of my time. I'm hoping that it's useful and approachable. Then it just gets people started.
So you'll put out an announcement when it's done. Sorry, Go ahead.
No, I want to see something that can encourage students to really kind of pitch into this and realize that they don't have to be overwhelmed, and that there are people who are willing to hold their hand all the way along until they've got more of it.
That's awesome. Well, I commend you for trying to make it accessible. I still haven't really figured it out.
There's a lot to figure out. That's why I said it's not a simple thing. You're not going to just learn. When you jump in, you realize it's a big world.
But I will say, and I don't have nearly as much clinical involvement as you do, but I have been, looking at ERPs in a clinical context as far as folks who are starting out with neurofeedback in a variety of conditions. And I have had that experience of seeing that like the QEEG is kind of like, yeah, this is probably correlated with what you're feeling. And then you look at the ERPs and, there's a whole bunch of different components, but there are some where there's a pretty, let's just say, linear or simple relationship with a particular disorder, right? And, anytime you can point to something like that where there's sort of corroborating evidence from a couple different aspects of the brain map, you do get people more enrolled in the process. And as a whatever person on the clinical side of things, me as a technologist, but you also get more, they're not just excited about like the process that's happening with them, and also a little bit more into their worlds, like really like kind of seeing what it's like to be them. Um, and that's coming from someone who like doesn't really understand them that much, but I'm just sort of starting to see different patterns. There's something that's satisfying about that after, QEEG is amazing to learn too, but it's satisfying when you see like two different views of the story kind of telling a similar story that complement each other.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do people sign up for the course, John?
I think they have to do it through the School of Neurotherapy.
All right.
Yeah.
And there's a discount for golden members, I think. So if you want to sign up and you're a golden member, I think it's half off if you're a golden member, right?
Yeah. Good thing I'm a gold member.
Yeah. What did we miss?
I don't know. I'm sure there are things that we've missed, but
What should people watch out for?
what should people watch out for?
Yeah, what should they keep an eye out for? You're coming out with a book in the future?
Bad EEG does not make for really good ERP. Uh, the same principles apply, garbage in, garbage out. Boy, in terms of what else to watch out for, knowing what your testing environment's like. You can't compare a person in a reclined chair looking at a large TV at 4 feet back from a person seated at a computer, however many centimeters apart based on what the testing environment was. You can't just play with the testing environment. You don't have to put them in stockades to to have their heads still or anything, but because they're stable enough now, and ICA does tremendously help with that in ERP. There are things like that we might have missed, but they get kind of technical. I don't know that they're built for a short video.
Well, that's what the course is for. That's why people got to come attend.
There you go.
All right, my man. It was great to see you. Thanks for sharing this.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the class. I'm going to be there. So if you're thinking about signing up, that's either a plus or a minus, I guess.
Take it a little plus. Why get neurotic on yourself?
Hey, this is just what people tell me.
At this point in time, I love who you are. You're a good man.
Thank you, John. You're a good man. And, you've been instrumental in my learning, helping me get connected with the Saybrook folks and onto innovations. So thank you for, bringing the community together.
Yeah. Okay. So a bunch of the physicians that had asked me to read their QEEGs connected to their medical EEGs, to read QEEG, because they would do a short QEEG portion before the medical EEG, and then to have reports written on both. They let go of me initially because they thought that they could do all of this through AI. And there's just not enough understanding of the literature and what it means and the differences in EEG. That they weren't able to come up with a solid way of creating an AI-based report system. And that's coming at some point in time, but it's not yet. because we don't have our own data points together.
So how do we make that happen? How do we get our human data points converging more?
Well, we talk about standardizing what it is we do in process. Jay did some of that initially when he said, look, we've got to look at 10 minutes and 10 minutes. Just as that's what is reimbursable for a routine EEG in a medical office. That's what we need to do at minimum. And then, how do we vigilance score? And that became a portion of it. And AI can generate a part of the report, but there is a part of it that, switching in montages and understanding his statement, there is no ground truth, that hasn't been understood by the larger academic field as well as it should be. So the assumption is, well, I looked at mine in average, and average is the montage to use to analyze all EEG, is very, very short-sighted. And so I've gotten a lot of reports that are Laplacian or average, and they don't catch little nuanced things that you can catch in transverse bipolar or longitudinal bipolar. And so you can't run that EEG just through an AI system. It's been the problem that Brainmasters had with QEEG Pro. Try to run it just purely through an AI system. It's not yet there. It's like dry electrodes. I mean, I'm really excited for the future of dry electrodes, but still not quite yet there. It's closer. And every time I look over, it's closer. It's catching up. Paul Bunyan, who's hammering away at his trees, is not ever going to be able to keep up with the steam-driven deforesting equipment. But, so at some point in time, I'll be completely obsolete, although my knowledge base never will be, but my way of walking through this process, a computer will do it much faster than I ever will. And they'll write the report faster, but it's not yet. It's just still a little bit back there.
So then how do people who are interested in this field prepare themselves to stay relevant?
I think that we do have to talk about how AI generates hypotheses and tests it. I think that that's part of the field now. NeuroGuide's auto report is so broad and general, but you can get that's an AI developed thing, but it's so broad and general, you really got to write the whole report anyway. So, it just pops images on a page for you, and it only does it in one condition. This is not a comparison of eyes open and eyes closed. And,
so people are supposed to think about those and provide their written commentary on what they see?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Think of that as professional responsibility.
Wow.
And that's what we get paid for. That's why we can't undercut the other people in the field by popping out $250 EEGs. I'll do it for $100. Hit auto report. It's terrible.
What do you think people should price it at?
But unless that provider says this is specifically what I want, I'm not going to do it.
So how should we be pricing these things?
I'm not sure how to not price ourselves out of the field as well. But I think that right now, across, at least I'm on the East Coast and the West Coast, I think it's very fair to ask for $1,100 to $1,200 for an EEG, and for somebody who's writing a report to ask for $650, $700 for a report. You should have enough auto-reported ideas, or you should have a template so that you can drag and drop ideas and then clean it up so that you're, not spending 8 hours on a report. You shouldn't be spending that long. But if you have those drag and drop basics, and then you can form it back into a document that still makes sense of what the basics are, I think that is a fair price for somebody who really analyzes an EEG and goes through it, really goes through it. And
So when a clinician is looking at that as an option versus QEEG Pro, which is $80 or something like that.
Yep. And, QEEG Pro will give you some possibilities. It will spit out some possibilities. I don't know that the spitting out of those possibilities always matches with the overall physiology. I think that a clinician sees an overall physiology much better than a computer does at this point in time. For instance, when I see an EEG, I'm thinking metabolically. I'm not thinking statistically. I use statistics to corroborate what I'm thinking metabolically. The EEG is downstream metabolic signal, and it's silly to think of it as anything but. When we've got all of that movement up there in our glorious cortex, that's all about how am I burning fuel right now. You think it is a quarter of all of the fuel burning that we're doing at any given time. That's a lot of the metabolic output that you have for the entire body. And when you see inefficiencies in the brain, you'll see them elsewhere. It reflects downstream what is happening upstream. That's the reason that when you've got protein structures that are being released by the liver because the liver's not properly operating, we find triphasic waves, kidneys. It's why we see things like, okay, you've got somebody with metabolic syndrome and their voltages go much lower, but they have larger bursts of slower alpha temporally and frontal temporally. That all of those things are metabolic. It's the body trying to conserve energy in one place to manage an energy problem or a blockage or a glut somewhere else. And that's, all of us are breaking down at different rates. But as we're breaking down, we can watch that. And the EEG is a very fine-tooth comb for metabolically what it is that we have going on. So I wish it was taught that way. It's usually taught as, look at this area over here and broaden this and broaden that. And, instead of thinking about it as energy consumption and management.
So do you think like transient bursts of like alpha or theta that are infrequent would maybe not necessarily show up on like a automated report?
Yeah, it really very infrequently will. It's got to be statistically enough. It's looking for outliers. And it's an AI that's to look for outliers. And in a quantitative sense, that may not be an outlier. In a very real reading through the EEG way, that can be an outlier. Like, what the heck is that 2-burst theta doing there again?
So to take it back to the notion of reports, I aspire to build my own sort of neuroanalysis service.
Mm-hmm.
What are the ethics of splitting the difference to get more people into human analysis from a cost perspective? Right? Somewhere between, I mean, honestly, my initial thought was like, well, what if I undercut the AI? What if I make it cheaper? But then I'm also undercutting, obviously, humans by a significant margin. Um, how does like a younger person with like a passion for QEEG, who's maybe not like running a clinic themselves, but like getting into EEG analysis, how do they think about like what service they have to offer with the knowledge that it's like AI is, people are trying to get AI to replace us on this front?
Yes. I'm not sure what you're asking there. I asked.
How mad will you be, John, if I do $100 reports?
A lot of people do $100 reports. You know, would I be mad? No, I see that as something coming to replace me on that front. I don't think I'm replaceable as a human being because my understanding of physiology and human psychology is complex. So I don't think that I'll be replaced, but I think that that portion of what I do is replaceable. So would I be mad? No, it'd just be, well. It goes back to that book from the early 90s, Who Moved the Cheese? Cheese is going to move. Where the cheese is in the mouse maze is going to move. And there's going to be a whole bunch of mice that are going to show up in that one corner expecting the cheese where it has been for the past X number of days. And when it's not there, they'll complain noisily. But eventually they got to move on and find another chunk of cheese or starve to death. We're constantly having to do that as human beings. And unfortunately, AI will replace a lot of things that we do. Fortunately, AI is not, I don't think that the transhumanism experiment is going to work. I think it's going to be an abysmal failure. And why would I think that? I think that there are metaphoric indicators for that go back in time immemorial. Human beings, somebody's going to build a tower to God and they're going to take over and become God. That was the Tower of Babel. This is another one of those. We're going to build this way to make ourselves our own God. And we're going to, approach this and everybody's going to be obsolete. And I don't think it's going to happen that way. It just won't hold up. There will be another confusing of language, so to speak. And that will change the way it'll be a confusing of perceptions. Think about it this way. Anytime you've got two computers that have to develop an internal language, you're going to have a conflict in logic paths between those two computers. And now we exponentially multiply that. There's going to be a problem. It's going to become inordinately complex. And that's part of the problem. We're already finding that problem in banking systems. Why do we think that we're going to not find that in EEG and everything else? You're just going to have human contact. So I would applaud $100 report that would say a lot of the things that I would say, and I would still look at the data and I would still at the end of the day go, well, here's my opinion to a patient or a client.
Yeah, and to me, it's also a question of like valuing expertise. On some level, in order for that to happen, we need to have people able to get more eyes looking at their data.
Yeah.
But it is tricky, right? And I mean, and even talking about it, it's like, I question, is this something that even I publish? Because it's like when people start to think about these things, it's like, it's a matter of choice how much I charge for it. Then the discounting of like all that's gone into my own kind of knowledge and training and experience, it's just, it's second nature to us. And the reality is, it's like, this is a hard skill to learn. You can't learn it in a week. You can't learn it in a month. You can't learn it in a year. You can barely learn it in like a decade. I'm a half decade in, and I've seen thousands, and it's still like, I get a second pair of eyes on most things before I ship it.
Yeah, I do too, pretty frequently.
Which also, it attracts people who have a passion, which is another liability from the business side. It's like everyone is excited about helping people, and they're excited about learning about the EEG. So then we discount what we do because we enjoy it on some level.
Well, it's great when your vocation and your avocation kind of cross over.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. It's been good to chat.
Yes, sir.
I'm excited for the class.
Yeah, it'll be good. Get you some viewers, and then maybe you can build your AI generated EEG system.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm for the development of better AI too.
Oh yeah,
We need to be valuing both more at the end of the day.
Totally.
And yeah, I mean, to the earlier points of like this rift between the clinical and the scientific community, the problem is that the scientific community doesn't even know how to ask the right questions. And they're the ones who are mostly in charge of engineering the algorithms.
Yep.
So we got to team up. We got to reconcile the battle between the therapists and the nerds, or the whatevers. And,
engineers always want to hear from the clinician. They do, because they know I'm not asking the right question. You just look at ThoughtTech's software, and you've got a marvel of some engineering that's missing so many clinical points. That's part of the drawback of it.
It's got a lot of menus.
Yes. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And that creates problems.
Yeah. Well, it's good to chat, man. And let's be in touch. And let's meet again some point after the course is over, and you can tell us about your book.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, man.
See it.
Adios.
Bye.